Michael Harrison adjusted his Italian silk tie for the third time in 5 minutes, his reflection staring back at him from the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office. The Seattle skyline stretched endlessly before him, a testament to the empire he had built from nothing. At 38, he was worth $3 billion, commanded respect in boardrooms across 5 continents, and had his face plastered on the covers of Fortune and Forbes more times than he cared to count. Yet tonight, as he prepared for what should have been a routine business dinner, his hands trembled with the kind of nervous energy he hadn't felt since his wedding day 8 years ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on him. 8 years ago, he had been trembling with anticipation, joy, and the overwhelming certainty that he was about to marry his soulmate. Tonight, the trembling came from a different source entirely, the knowledge that in less than an hour he would be dining at Chez Laurent, the same restaurant where he and Sarah had celebrated their first anniversary, their third wedding anniversary, and countless other milestones that now felt like scenes from someone else's life. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant confirming the reservation details, but Michael barely glanced at it. Instead, his eyes drifted to the silver picture frame that sat at the edge of his mahogany desk, partially hidden behind a stack of merger documents. The photo showed a younger version of himself, with his arm wrapped around a radiant woman with auburn hair and emerald eyes that seemed to capture sunlight even in the stillness of the photograph. Sarah Collins, or Sarah Harrison, as she had been for exactly 4 years, 2 months and 16 days, 4 years. That's how long their marriage had lasted, before the demands of building his tech empire had consumed every waking moment, every conversation, every shared dream they had once whispered to each other in the darkness of their modest first apartment. The woman in the photograph looked genuinely happy, her smile reaching her eyes in a way that Michael couldn't remember seeing in those final fractured months before their divorce. He picked up the frame, running his thumb along the glass surface. Sarah had been 26 when this photo was taken, fresh out of her master's program in environmental science, full of passion for saving the world, one sustainable project at a time. She had believed in him when Harrison Technologies was nothing, more than a dream scribbled on napkins in coffee shops, when their biggest worry was making rent on their cramped studio apartment near the university. But success, Michael had learned the hard way, was a demanding mistress. The 18-hour days, the international flights that kept him away for weeks at a time, the constant pressure to innovate, to stay ahead, to prove that his company deserved its unicorn status. It had all seemed worth it when he was building something that would change the world. What he hadn't realized until it was too late was that he was building his empire on the ruins of his marriage. The divorce papers had been signed 2 years ago, but the wounds still felt fresh. Not because of any lingering romantic feelings. Michael had convinced himself that he had moved past that particular pain, but because of the way it had ended. Not with screaming fights or dramatic confrontations, but with the slow, inevitable erosion of 2 people who had simply grown into strangers sharing the same address. Sarah had tried. God knew she had tried. She had waited through missed dinners, cancelled vacations, and forgotten anniversaries. She had supported his dreams even when those dreams left no room for her own aspirations. But everyone had a breaking point, and Sarah's had come on a rainy Tuesday evening when Michael had missed their 4th wedding anniversary dinner because of an emergency board meeting that, in retrospect, could have been handled the following day. He remembered coming home at nearly midnight to find her sitting at their kitchen table, still wearing the emerald green dress she had bought specifically for their anniversary celebration. The restaurant reservation had long since been cancelled. The champagne had been returned to the refrigerator unopened, and the carefully wrapped gift she had bought him sat untouched on the counter. "I can't do this anymore, Michael," she had said quietly, her voice steady, but her eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion that went deeper than just the late hour. "I feel like I'm married to a ghost." They had tried counseling, of course. 3 sessions with Dr. Patricia Henderson, a renowned relationship therapist whose office walls were lined with certificates and testimonials from couples she had supposedly saved. But it was too little, too late. Michael had approached the therapy sessions like another business meeting, checking his phone during breaks, mentally reviewing quarterly projections while Dr. Henderson tried to guide them through communication exercises. The final session had ended with Sarah looking at him with a mixture of sadness and something that might have been pity. "You built exactly the life you wanted, Michael," she had said as they walked to their cars in the parking garage beneath Dr. Henderson's office building. "I just wasn't part of that vision." Now, 2 years later, Michael had everything he had thought he wanted. Harrison Technologies was preparing to go public in what analysts predicted would be the largest IPO in the tech sector in over a decade. His personal net worth had crossed the $3 billion mark 6 months ago. He owned homes in Seattle, New York, London, and a vineyard in Napa Valley that he had visited exactly twice. His social calendar was filled with galas, charity events, and exclusive gatherings where he rubbed shoulders with senators, celebrities, and other titans of industry. But tonight, as he prepared to meet with Chen Industries executives to discuss a potential partnership that could add another billion to his company's valuation, all he could think about was Sarah. Not because he harbored any illusions about reconciliation. That ship had sailed the moment she had signed the divorce papers with the same methodical precision she had once applied to her environmental impact reports. No, Sarah was occupying his thoughts because Chez Laurent had been their place, and he couldn't shake the feeling that having this dinner there was somehow a betrayal of what they had once shared. His phone rang, interrupting his brooding. The caller ID showed his assistant's name, Rebecca Martinez, a consummate professional who had managed his schedule with military precision for the past 3 years. "Mr. Harrison," Rebecca's crisp voice came through the speaker. "I wanted to confirm that your car will be downstairs in 10 minutes. The reservation at Chez Laurent is confirmed for 7:30, and I've taken the liberty of having the wine list sent ahead with your preferences noted." "Thank you, Rebecca," Michael replied, straightening his shoulders and forcing his business demeanor back into place. "Has there been any change to the attendee list?" "No changes. James Chen will be accompanied by his VP of Strategic Development, Lisa Wong, and their Chief Technology Officer, David Park. The translator you requested will meet you at the restaurant, though Mr. Chen's English is quite good, according to our preliminary conversations." Michael nodded, even though Rebecca couldn't see him. Chen Industries represented exactly the kind of partnership that could catapult Harrison Technologies into the Asian markets he had been trying to crack for 2 years. James Chen was old school, the kind of businessman who preferred to conduct major negotiations over excellent food and wine, rather than in sterile conference rooms. Hence the choice of Chez Laurent, which was renowned not just for its Michelin-starred cuisine, but for its discretion and private dining rooms that had hosted everyone from tech moguls to foreign dignitaries. "One more thing, Mr. Harrison," Rebecca continued. "I know you mentioned that this restaurant has some personal significance. Are you certain you wouldn't prefer to move the dinner to Le Bernardin or Canlis? Both have availability and would certainly impress the Chen Industries team." Michael paused, considering the offer. It would be the sensible thing to do, the emotionally mature choice. But something in him resisted the idea of backing down, of allowing the ghosts of his failed marriage to dictate his business decisions. "No," he said firmly. Chez Laurent is perfect. The private dining room we reserved will provide the intimacy that Mr. Chen values, and the wine cellar is legendary. This dinner is too important to let personal history interfere. Understood. Sir, your car should be arriving momentarily. After ending the call, Michael took one last look around his office. The space was a monument to his success. Custom Italian furniture, original artwork from emerging artists whose pieces would likely be worth millions in a decade, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with first editions and industry publications. A putting green occupied one corner, complete with an antique putter that had once belonged to a Scottish golf legend. Everything was perfect, precisely arranged, and utterly without warmth. He grabbed his coat, a bespoke cashmere blend from a London tailor whose waiting list stretched 2 years, and headed for the elevator. The descent from the 42nd floor gave him a moment to center himself, to push thoughts of Sarah into the compartment of his mind, reserved for things that belonged to the past. Tonight was about the future, about securing the partnership that would establish Harrison Technologies as a global player rather than just another successful American tech company. The elevator opened directly into the parking garage, where his driver waited beside a midnight blue Bentley Continental. Thomas had been his driver for nearly 3 years, a former Secret Service agent whose discretion was matched only by his ability to navigate Seattle traffic like a Formula One driver when necessary. "Good evening, Mr. Harrison," Thomas said, opening the rear door with practiced efficiency. "Traffic is light tonight. We should arrive at Chez Laurent with time to spare." Michael settled into the leather seat and immediately reached for his tablet, intending to review the Chen Industries. Proposal one final time. But as Thomas navigated through the downtown streets, Michael found his concentration drifting. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows, and despite his best efforts, his mind wandered back to the last time he had made this journey to Chez Laurent. It had been 6 months before the divorce was finalized. Sarah had suggested they try one more time, that they go back to the restaurant where they had celebrated so many happier moments and see if they could find some echo of what they had once shared. Michael had agreed, partly out of guilt and partly out of a desperate hope that maybe somehow they could bridge the chasm that had opened between them. The dinner had been a disaster, not because of any dramatic confrontation, but because of how painfully clear it had become that they were two strangers making polite conversation. Sarah had tried to share details about her new job with the environmental consulting firm, and Michael had found himself mentally reviewing a product launch timeline while she spoke. When she had asked about his latest project, he had launched into a detailed explanation of cloud computing architecture that had made her eyes glaze over within minutes. They had made it through the main course before Sarah had quietly excused herself, claiming a sudden headache. Michael had insisted on driving her home, and they had sat in his car outside her apartment building in complete silence for nearly 5 minutes before she had finally spoken. "We're different people than we were when we met, aren't we?" she had said, her voice barely audible over the gentle hum of the car's engine. Michael had wanted to argue, to insist that they could work through whatever had changed between them. Instead, he had found himself nodding. "Yeah," he had said. "I think we are." Sarah had leaned over and kissed his cheek, a gesture so tender and final that it had taken every ounce of his self-control not to pull her into his arms and beg her to give them one more chance. "I want you to be happy, Michael," she had whispered. "I really do. I just don't think I'm the person who can make that happen anymore." Now, as Thomas turned onto the street where Chez Laurent occupied a prime corner location, Michael pushed the memory away. That chapter of his life was closed, filed away like a completed project. Tonight was about the future, about building something even bigger and more ambitious than what he had already accomplished. Chez Laurent looked exactly as he remembered it. an elegant facade of warm brick and beveled glass, with soft golden light spilling from the windows onto the sidewalk, where a doorman in a perfectly pressed uniform waited to greet arriving guests. The restaurant occupied the ground floor of a historic building that had been meticulously restored, maintaining its early 20th century charm while incorporating modern amenities that attracted Seattle's elite. "I'll be approximately 2 hours, Michael told Thomas as he stepped out of the Bentley. "Perhaps 3 if the negotiations extend longer than anticipated." "Very good, sir." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I'll be waiting." Michael straightened his tie one final time and walked toward the entrance, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the pavement with each confident step. The doorman recognized him immediately. Not surprising, given that Michael's face had graced the business section of the Seattle Times just 3 weeks ago, following Harrison Technologies' announcement of their upcoming IPO. "Good evening, Mr. Harrison," the doorman said with a warm smile. "Welcome back to Chez Laurent. Mr. Baptiste is expecting you." Henri Baptiste, the restaurant's owner and head sommelier, emerged from the interior as if summoned by telepathy. A distinguished man in his early 60s with silver hair and the kind of refined bearing that came from decades of catering to the city's most discerning clientele. Henri had owned Chez Laurent for nearly 20 years and was known for his ability to pair wines with both food and the personalities of his guests. "Michael," Henri said, extending his hand with genuine warmth. "It has been too long, my friend. When Rebecca called to make the reservation, I was delighted to hear you were returning to us." "Thank you, Henri. It's good to be back." Michael shook the older man's hand, surprised by how easily the polite lie rolled off his tongue. Being back at Chez Laurent felt like stepping into a museum exhibit of his former life, but Henri's genuine hospitality made it bearable. "Your guests have not yet arrived," Henri continued, guiding Michael through the restaurant's main dining room. "I have prepared the Bordeaux room as requested, private, intimate, perfect for important conversations, and I took the liberty of selecting several bottles from our cellar that I believe will complement both the menu and the significance of your evening." The main dining room of Chez Laurent was everything Michael remembered. Tables draped in crisp white linens, fresh flowers that filled the air with subtle fragrance, and the kind of soft lighting that made everyone look like they were starring in a romantic film. The clientele was exactly what one would expect from a restaurant of this caliber. Well-dressed couples engaged in quiet conversation, business associates sharing discreet meals, and the occasional celebrity trying to enjoy an evening without being photographed. As they walked toward the private dining room, Michael's attention was caught by a burst of laughter from a table near the windows. It was the kind of genuine, unguarded laughter that was rare in establishments like this, where most conversations were conducted in carefully modulated tones, designed not to carry to neighboring tables. He glanced toward the source of the sound and stopped so abruptly that Henri nearly collided with him. There, seated at a table for 4 near the window, was Sarah, but this wasn't the Sarah he remembered from their final dinner together, the woman who had looked exhausted and defeated. This Sarah was radiant, her auburn hair longer than she had worn it during their marriage, catching the light as she threw her head back in another peal of laughter. She was wearing a simple but elegant navy blue dress that he didn't recognize, and her face had a glow that he realized he hadn't seen in the final years of their marriage. But what truly stopped Michael in his tracks wasn't just seeing Sarah again. It was what he saw next to her. 2 children, probably around 5 or 6 years old, sat across from her at the table. Twins, from the look of them, a boy and a girl with the same dark hair and mischievous smiles. The little girl was animatedly telling a story, her hands gesturing wildly as she spoke, while the boy giggled at something she had said. Sarah watched them with an expression of pure adoration, occasionally reaching across the table to wipe sauce from a small face or help with a particularly challenging bite of food. Michael felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. Sarah had twins. Sarah, who had talked wistfully about having children someday during their marriage, who had converted their spare bedroom into a nursery in her mind a dozen times, who had finally stopped bringing up the subject when it became clear that Michael's timeline for starting a family was perpetually pushed back by the next product launch, the next investor meeting, the next milestone that seemed more urgent than building the family they had once dreamed about. Michael. Henri's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right, my friend?" Michael realized he had been staring, probably for longer than was socially acceptable. He forced himself to look away from Sarah's table, but the image of her laughing with the two children was burned into his retinas. "I'm fine," he managed, though his voice sounded strange to his own ears. "Just thought I recognized someone." Henri followed his gaze, and his expression grew knowing. "Ah," he said quietly. "Mrs. Harrison, or rather Ms. Collins now, I suppose. She comes in occasionally with the children. Lovely family." The casual way Henri delivered this information hit Michael like a physical blow. Sarah was a regular here at their restaurant with her children. She had continued coming to the place that had once been special to them, had created new memories here that had nothing to do with the life they had shared. "The children," Michael heard himself asking, "are they?" Henri paused, clearly, understanding the question behind the question. His expression grew carefully neutral, the look of a man who had spent decades managing the personal dramas that inevitably played out in his establishment. "Perhaps we should continue to your table," Henri suggested diplomatically. "Your guests will be arriving soon, and we want everything to be perfect for your evening." Michael nodded, allowing Henri to guide him away from the main dining room and down a hallway lined with wine bottles and black and white photographs of the restaurant's history. But even as he walked, his mind was reeling with questions and calculations. The twins looked to be around 5 or 6 years old. Michael and Sarah had been divorced for 2 years, which meant she would have been pregnant when their divorce was being finalized, or perhaps even earlier. During those final months when they were living together but barely speaking, when he was traveling constantly, and she was. What had she been doing during those long absences? Who had she been seeing? The Bordeaux room was exactly as Henri had promised. Intimate without being cramped, elegant without being ostentatious. A round table dominated the space, set with crystal glasses and silver that gleamed under the warm light of a small chandelier. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the restaurant's private garden, where strategically placed lighting created a magical atmosphere among the carefully tended plants and flowers. "I will send your guests directly back when they arrive," Henri said, beginning to retreat. "And Michael, perhaps it would be best to focus on the evening ahead. The past has a way of complicating the present if we allow it." After Henri left, Michael found himself alone with his thoughts and the weight of what he had just discovered. He walked to the window, staring out at the garden without really seeing it. Sarah had children, twins who looked nothing like him, which answered at least one of the questions that had been forming in his mind. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Chen Industries team is running about 10 minutes late due to traffic. Should I inform the restaurant?" Michael typed back a quick response, confirming that the delay was fine, but his hands were shaking as he did so. The professional part of his mind knew that he needed to pull himself together to compartmentalize this shock and focus on the critical business dinner ahead. The Chen Industries partnership could add hundreds of millions to his company's valuation and open doors throughout Asia that had been closed to him for years. But the personal part of his mind, the part that he had thought he had successfully, buried beneath layers of ambition and achievement, was spinning with the implications of what he had seen. Sarah had moved on, completely and thoroughly. She had found someone else, had the children she had always wanted, and was living what appeared to be a happy, fulfilling life that bore no resemblance to the fractured existence they had shared. In their final years together, he thought about the way she had laughed with the children, the natural ease with which she had interacted with them. It was the same warmth she had once brought to their relationship, the same genuine joy that had first attracted him to her when they were both graduate students, attending the same environmental science lecture series. Sarah had been auditing the classes while working on her master's thesis, and Michael had been there because his early business plan had involved developing sustainable technology solutions. They had struck up a conversation after a particularly dense lecture on carbon sequestration, and Michael had been charmed by her passion for environmental issues and her ability to explain complex scientific concepts in ways that made them accessible to his business-focused mind. Their first coffee date had turned into a 4-hour conversation that ranged from climate change to their favorite books to their dreams for the future. Sarah had wanted to work for the Environmental Protection Agency to help craft policies that would make a real difference in combating climate change. Michael had wanted to build a technology company that would revolutionize how businesses approached sustainability. They had seemed like perfect partners, both professionally and personally, working toward compatible goals with complementary skills. But somewhere along the way, Michael's focus had shifted. The technology company had grown beyond his wildest expectations, and the demands of managing rapid expansion had gradually consumed more and more of his attention. The sustainability focus had given way to broader tech applications. The mission-driven startup had become a profit-focused corporation, and the partnership with Sarah had dissolved into parallel lives that rarely intersected. Now, standing in the private dining room of the restaurant where they had once celebrated their dreams, Michael was forced to confront the reality that Sarah had continued pursuing her version of their shared future while he had been building his empire. She had the family they had talked about, the life filled with laughter and connection that had once seemed so appealing when viewed from the stressed-out perspective of their failing marriage. A soft knock at the door interrupted his brooding. Henri entered, followed by 3 individuals who could only be the Chen Industries team. James Chen was exactly as Michael had pictured him from their phone conversations, a distinguished man in his early 50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from decades of successful business negotiations. Lisa Wong appeared to be in her 30s, with sharp eyes and a confident handshake that immediately marked her as someone who had fought for her position in what was still largely a male-dominated industry. David Park looked younger, probably fresh out of an elite computer science program with the kind of intense focus that Michael recognized in many brilliant engineers. "Mr. Harrison," James Chen said in excellent English with only the slightest accent, "thank you for choosing such a beautiful venue for our discussion. I have heard wonderful things about Chez Laurent." Michael forced himself into his professional persona, the one that had charmed investors, intimidated competitors, and built Harrison Technologies into the powerhouse it had become. "The pleasure is entirely mine," he replied, shaking hands with each member of the team. "I believe great partnerships deserve great settings, and I'm confident that what we discuss tonight will be the beginning of something mutually beneficial." As they settled around the table, Henri appeared with the first bottle of wine, a burgundy that Michael knew would pair perfectly with the appetizers they had selected. The sommelier's practiced hands made quick work of opening the bottle, and soon they were engaged in the ritual of tasting and approval that marked the beginning of serious business dinners. But even as Michael went through the motions of being The perfect host, part of his attention, remained fractured. He found himself wondering if Sarah was still in the main dining room with her children, if she had any idea that her ex-husband was just down the hallway, conducting business in the same restaurant where they had once dreamed about their future. Together, I understand that Harrison Technologies has been exploring opportunities in the Asian markets for some time, Lisa Wong was saying, her voice pulling Michael fully back to the present. Our research suggests that your cloud computing platform would be particularly well suited to the manufacturing sector in Southeast Asia. Michael nodded, grateful to have a concrete topic to focus on. That's correct. We've identified significant opportunities in manufacturing optimization, particularly in industries that are looking to reduce their environmental impact while increasing efficiency. The conversation flowed naturally from there, covering market analyses, potential implementation strategies, and the kind of financial projections that were Michael's specialty. As they moved through the carefully orchestrated courses of their meal, Michael found his confidence returning. This was his element, the world where he excelled without question or doubt. James Chen proved to be exactly the kind of partner Michael had hoped for. Sophisticated, well-informed, and genuinely interested in building something substantial rather than just pursuing quick profits. David Park's technical questions were incisive and demonstrated a deep understanding of Harrison Technologies' platform, while Lisa Wong's strategic insights revealed the kind of long-term thinking that made for successful international partnerships. By the time they reached the main course, perfectly prepared lamb with seasonal vegetables that showcased Chez Laurent's culinary excellence, Michael was feeling genuinely optimistic about the potential partnership. The conversation had moved beyond preliminary discussions into specific timelines and implementation strategies. I must say, James Chen remarked as he savored the wine Henri had selected to accompany their entrees, your company's commitment to sustainable technology solutions aligns perfectly with the direction Chinese industry is moving. The government's new environmental regulations are creating significant demand for exactly the kind of innovations Harrison Technologies specializes in. Michael smiled, recognizing an opening when he saw one. Sustainability has always been at the core of our mission, he said, the words flowing smoothly, despite the fact that he hadn't thought about the company's environmental mission in months. We believe that businesses have a responsibility to consider their impact on the world, not just their bottom line. As soon as the words left his mouth, Michael felt a pang of something that might have been guilt. Sarah would have been proud to hear him talking about environmental responsibility with such conviction. It had been her passion for making a positive impact that had originally inspired his company's mission statement, her research that had informed their early sustainability algorithms, her vision that had shaped what Harrison Technologies had initially set out to accomplish. When had he stopped thinking about that mission? When had the quarterly profit reports and investor expectations begun to matter more than the environmental impact assessments that Sarah had once helped him prepare? "Are you all right, Mr. Harrison?" David Park asked, his young face showing genuine concern. "You seem distracted." Michael realized he had been staring at his wine glass, lost in memories that had no place at a business dinner. He looked up to find all three of his guests watching him, with expressions ranging from concern to polite confusion. "My apologies," he said, straightening in his chair and forcing his professional smile back into place. "I was just thinking about how much this partnership could accomplish. Sometimes the possibilities are overwhelming." Lisa Wong nodded understandingly. "It's exciting when you can see the potential for real impact. That's what drew me to Chen Industries, the opportunity to work on projects that could make a genuine difference in how businesses approach sustainability." The word sustainability hit Michael like a physical blow, because suddenly he could hear Sarah's voice explaining the concept to him during one of their late-night conversations. In their first apartment, she had been working on her master's thesis, and he had been trying to understand the market potential for environmentally friendly technology. They had spent hours talking about carbon footprints and renewable energy and the responsibility that successful businesses had to consider their impact on future generations. "The children who will inherit the world we're creating," Sarah had said one night, curled up next to him on their second-hand couch with research papers spread across the coffee table. "Don't we owe them something better than what we inherited?" Now, sitting in the elegant private dining room of Chez Laurent, Michael found himself thinking about the twins he had seen with Sarah. Someone else's children, but children nonetheless, who would inherit whatever world his generation left behind. When was the last time he had made a business decision based on its environmental impact rather than its profit potential? The conversation continued around him, but Michael felt as though he was watching it from outside his own body. James Chen was discussing implementation timelines. Lisa Wong was outlining potential challenges in the Southeast Asian markets, and David Park was asking technical questions that demonstrated impressive knowledge of Harrison Technologies' systems. It was exactly the kind of meeting Michael had conducted hundreds of times, the kind of strategic discussion that had built his billion-dollar empire. So why did he feel like he was failing some test he hadn't even known he was taking? "Mr. Harrison," James Chen said, his voice carrying a note of gentle insistence that suggested this wasn't the first time he had tried to get Michael's attention. "Perhaps we should discuss the specifics of the revenue-sharing arrangement." Michael blinked, forcing himself back into the present moment. This was the crucial part of the negotiation, the point where partnerships were made or lost based on financial details and risk assessments. He had prepared extensively for this discussion, had run multiple scenarios with his financial team, and knew exactly what terms would be acceptable to both parties. "Of course," he said, reaching for the folder he had brought with the detailed proposal. "I think you'll find our terms quite competitive." But even as he opened the folder and began outlining the financial structure they had developed, part of his mind remained focused on the image of Sarah laughing with those two children. She had looked genuinely happy in a way that he couldn't remember seeing during their marriage, especially not in those final months when every conversation had felt like they were speaking different languages. The negotiations proceeded smoothly, with both sides showing the kind of flexibility that suggested a genuine desire to reach an agreement. James Chen's team had clearly done their homework, and their questions demonstrated both respect for Harrison Technologies' capabilities and realistic expectations about the challenges of expanding into new markets. By the time dessert arrived, an elaborate chocolate creation that was as much art as food, they had reached preliminary agreement on most of the major points. The partnership would begin with a pilot program in 3 Southeast Asian markets, with the potential for rapid expansion if the initial results met their projections. "I believe we have the foundation for something quite remarkable," James Chen said, raising his wine glass in a toast, "to partnerships that create value for everyone involved." Michael raised his own glass, genuinely pleased with how the evening had progressed despite his earlier distraction, to building something bigger than any of us could accomplish alone. As they clinked glasses, Michael felt a familiar surge of satisfaction. This was what he excelled at, what had made him successful beyond his wildest dreams. The ability to see opportunities, to bring together complementary strengths, to create value where none had existed before. The Chen Industries partnership would be another triumph, another proof point that his instincts and abilities were as sharp as ever. But even as he savored the moment of professional success, He couldn't shake the image of Sarah's face as she had laughed with those children. There had been something in her expression, a contentment and joy that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than professional achievement or financial success. The evening was winding down as Henri appeared with a selection of aged cognacs and single malt whiskies, the kind of luxury touches that had made Chez Laurent legendary among Seattle's business elite. James Chen selected a cognac that had been aging longer than David Park had been alive, while Lisa Wong opted for a scotch that Michael recognized as being worth more per ounce than most people spent on dinner. As they savored their drinks and discussed implementation timelines, Michael found himself genuinely impressed by the Chen Industries team. They possessed the rare combination of technical expertise and business acumen that made for successful long-term partnerships. James Chen, in particular, had the kind of strategic vision that Michael respected, the ability to see several moves ahead in the complex chess game of international business. "I'd like to propose a timeline for the initial pilot program," Lisa Wong said, pulling out a tablet and consulting what appeared to be a meticulously planned project schedule. "If we can finalize the legal agreements within the next month, we could begin implementation in Singapore and Bangkok by the third quarter." Michael nodded approvingly. The timeline was aggressive, but achievable. Exactly the kind of bold approach that had built his own company. "Our technical team will need 2 weeks to customize the platform for the specific regulatory requirements in each market," he replied. "But that should fit well within your proposed schedule." David Park leaned forward, his eyes lighting up, with the kind of enthusiasm that Michael remembered from his own early days in the technology sector. "I've been studying your sustainability algorithms," he said. "The carbon footprint calculations are remarkably sophisticated. Did your team develop those internally, or did you work with environmental consultants?" The question hit Michael like a sucker punch to the gut. The sustainability algorithms that David was praising so enthusiastically had been developed in collaboration with Sarah during the early days of Harrison Technologies. She had contributed not just her environmental science expertise, but countless hours of unpaid labor, helping him understand the complex relationships between industrial processes and their ecological impact. Those algorithms had been one of Harrison Technologies' first major innovations, the foundation upon which much of their early success had been built. Sarah's fingerprints were all over the code, her insights woven into the fundamental architecture that still powered some of their most important applications. "We worked with some of the best environmental scientists in the field," Michael said carefully, the half-truth sitting uncomfortably in his throat. "Understanding the real-world impact of our technology has always been a priority." As he spoke, Michael realized that he couldn't remember the last time he had personally reviewed those sustainability algorithms. Somewhere along the way, as Harrison Technologies had grown and diversified, the environmental focus had become just one feature among many, rather than the core mission that had originally driven the company's development. When was the last time he had made a business decision based primarily on its environmental impact? When had profit margins begun to matter more than carbon footprints? The questions were uncomfortable, particularly in the presence of potential partners who seemed to genuinely care about the sustainability aspects of their collaboration. James Chen was nodding thoughtfully. "Environmental responsibility is becoming increasingly important in Asian markets," he said. "Our clients are under growing pressure from both regulatory agencies and consumer groups to demonstrate genuine commitment to sustainability. Having a partner with proven expertise in this area is invaluable." Michael smiled and made appropriate responses, but part of his mind was still grappling with the uncomfortable realization that Harrison Technologies' reputation for environmental responsibility was built largely on work that Sarah had contributed. during their marriage. Since their divorce, how much genuine innovation had the company produced in sustainability? How many of their recent products were driven by environmental considerations versus pure profit potential? The conversation continued, but Michael found his attention drifting again. Through the windows of the private dining room, he could see into the main restaurant, where the evening crowd was beginning to thin out. Most of the tables were empty now, their white linens being reset for the following day's service. He wondered if Sarah and the twins were still there, or if they had finished their dinner and gone home to whatever life she had built for herself. The thought of her tucking those children into bed, reading them stories, being present for all. The small daily moments that make up a family's life created a strange ache in his chest that he couldn't quite identify. During their marriage, Sarah had often talked about the kind of mother she wanted to be: patient, present, engaged with her children's interests and activities. The Chen Industries dinner concluded with handshakes and exchanged business cards, promises of follow-up meetings and legal reviews. Michael walked his guests through the restaurant's main dining room, making polite conversation about Seattle's dining scene and their travel plans for the following day. But his eyes swept the space, searching for any sign of Sarah and the twins. The table where he had spotted them earlier was now empty, reset with fresh linens and gleaming silverware for the next day's service. As Thomas drove him home through the quiet streets of downtown Seattle, Michael stared out the window at the city lights blurring past. The meeting had been a complete success by any measurable standard. The Chen Industries partnership would likely add $800 million to Harrison Technologies' valuation and open doors throughout Asia that had been closed for years. His board of directors would be thrilled, his investors would see substantial returns, and the tech industry publications would undoubtedly herald it as another brilliant strategic move by the boy wonder of sustainable technology. But the taste of success felt strangely hollow tonight, overshadowed by the image of Sarah's face as she had laughed with those children. There had been something in her expression that he couldn't shake, a quality of genuine contentment that seemed to radiate from somewhere deep inside her. It was the same warmth he remembered from their early days together, but somehow more settled, more complete. His penthouse apartment welcomed him with its familiar silence and precisely controlled climate. The space had been featured in Architectural Digest 2 years ago, praised for its clean lines, spectacular views, and seamless integration of technology with luxury. Every surface was perfect, every piece of furniture carefully selected by an interior designer whose client list read like a who's who of tech moguls and entertainment industry titans. Michael poured himself a scotch from a bottle that cost more than most people's monthly salary and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Elliott Bay. The water stretched out before him, dotted with the lights of ferries and pleasure craft, while the Olympic Mountains formed a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky. It was the kind of view that visitors always gasped over, the kind of luxury that confirmed everything he had accomplished. Yet tonight, the magnificent view felt like a painting in a museum, beautiful but untouchable, impressive but somehow lacking in life. He thought about Sarah's modest apartment during their marriage, with its second-hand furniture and kitchen table covered in research papers. It had been cramped and cluttered and completely warm, filled with the kind of energy that came from two people building something together. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca, confirming his schedule for the following day and noting that 3 different tech publications had already requested interviews about the Chen Industries partnership. News traveled fast in Seattle's tight-knit business community, and Michael's meetings were often the subject of speculation and analysis among industry watchers. But instead of feeling the usual satisfaction at being the center of such attention, Michael found himself wondering about Sarah's life. Where did she live now? What did she do for work? Who was the father of those twins, and how had she met him? The questions multiplied in his mind, each one leading to a dozen others that he had no way of answering. He could have found out. Of course, a single phone call to his head of security would have provided him with Sarah's current address, employment history, and probably the name of every person she had dated since their divorce. The resources at his disposal made such research trivially easy, but something held him back from crossing that line. Perhaps it was respect for her privacy, or perhaps it was fear of what he might discover. Instead, he found himself opening his laptop and searching for Sarah's name on social media platforms. Her Facebook profile was set to private, showing only a profile picture of her with a large golden retriever in what appeared to be a park setting. Her LinkedIn page was more revealing, showing that she had continued working in environmental consulting and had recently been promoted to senior partner at a firm that specialized in helping corporations reduce their carbon footprints. The irony wasn't lost on him. While he had been building a technology empire that paid lip service to environmental responsibility, Sarah had remained true to their original shared vision of making a genuine difference in the fight against climate change. Her firm's client list included several Fortune 500 companies, and her recent publications suggested that she had become a recognized expert in corporate sustainability strategies. Michael found himself reading through her professional achievements with a mixture of pride and regret. Pride because the woman he had once loved was clearly thriving in her chosen field, making the kind of impact they had both dreamed about during their idealistic early days together. Regret because he had somehow lost sight of those same ideals, allowing the intoxicating pursuit of growth and profit to overshadow the mission that had originally inspired him to start Harrison Technologies. The Scotch was making him maudlin, he realized. Tomorrow he would wake up, review the Chen Industries proposal with his legal team, and continue building the empire that had already exceeded his wildest dreams. Tonight's unexpected encounter with Sarah would fade into memory, filed away with all the other might-have-beens that successful people accumulated over the course of ambitious careers. But sleep proved elusive. Michael lay in his custom-made bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the sound of Sarah's laughter echoing through Chez Laurent's elegant dining room. There had been something so natural about the way she had interacted with those children, so effortless and genuine. She had looked like someone who had found her place in the world, who understood exactly what mattered most. During their marriage, Sarah had often talked about wanting children, not in the abstract way that many couples discuss their future family, but with specific details about the kind of mother she wanted to be. She had wanted to coach little league teams and help with science fair projects and create family traditions that would give their children a sense of belonging and security. Michael had always agreed that children were part of their future plans, but somehow that future had been perpetually postponed. First, he had needed to secure the initial round of venture capital funding. Then they had to hire their first 10 employees and establish their market position. After that, it was the Series B funding round, followed by the expansion into European markets, followed by the acquisition of 3 smaller competitors. There had always been one more milestone to reach, one more goal to accomplish before they could turn their attention to starting a family. Sarah had been patient at first, understanding that building a company required enormous sacrifice and dedication. But as the months had turned into years, her patience had worn thin. Michael remembered their last serious conversation about having children. It had been during their 3rd year of marriage, and Sarah had just turned 30. She had brought up the subject during dinner at home, suggesting that they start trying to conceive in the following year. "I know the company needs your attention," she had said, cutting her chicken into precise pieces without looking at him. "But I need to know that I'm part of your plans too." Not just someday, but actual plans with actual timelines. Michael had launched into his usual explanation about market conditions and growth targets, about the importance of establishing their competitive position before taking on the additional responsibilities of parenthood. He had promised that they would revisit the conversation after the next round of funding, or maybe after they had successfully launched their European operations. Sarah had listened quietly, nodding at appropriate intervals, but something in her expression had shifted during that conversation. A light in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by the kind of resignation that comes from repeatedly postponing your deepest dreams for someone else's priorities. Now, lying alone in his expensive bed, Michael wondered if that had been the beginning of the end for their marriage. Not the explosive arguments or dramatic confrontations that ended some relationships, but the slow erosion of shared dreams and the gradual realization that they were building different versions of their future. His phone rang at 6:30 the following morning, pulling him from the fitful sleep he had finally managed. Rebecca's name appeared on the caller ID, which was unusual since she rarely contacted him before 7, unless there was some kind of emergency. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison." Rebecca's voice was crisper than usual, carrying the kind of professional urgency that suggested important news. "I apologize for calling so early, but I wanted to brief you on some developments before your first meeting." Michael sat up, immediately alert. In the technology industry, news could break at any hour, and successful executives needed to be prepared to respond quickly to changing circumstances. "What kind of developments?" he asked, already reaching for the tablet on his nightstand to check the latest business news. "The Chen Industries partnership announcement has generated significant media interest," Rebecca replied. "I've received interview requests from TechCrunch, The Wall Street Journal, and Bloomberg Businessweek. Additionally, there's been some unexpected attention regarding your personal life." Michael's stomach dropped. In his experience, unexpected attention regarding personal matters was rarely positive, especially when it involved high-profile business executives. "What kind of attention?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "A photographer from Seattle Society magazine was apparently dining at Chez Laurent last night," Rebecca said carefully. "They published several photos from the evening, including one of you in the restaurant's main dining room. The caption mentions that you were there for a business dinner, but there's also speculation about other diners who were present." Michael closed his eyes, feeling a familiar knot forming in his stomach. Seattle Society magazine was the kind of publication that thrived on gossip about the city's wealthy and influential residents. Their photographers were notorious for capturing candid moments at upscale venues, and their writers had a talent for creating intrigue out of the most innocent circumstances. "What kind of speculation?" he asked, though he was beginning to suspect where this conversation was heading. "The magazine is suggesting that your presence at Chez Laurent might have been related to more than just business," Rebecca replied. "Diplomatically. Specifically, they've noted that your ex-wife was also dining there last night, along with 2 young children." The knot in Michael's stomach tightened. He should have anticipated this possibility, should have realized that choosing such a high-profile venue for the Chen Industries dinner would attract attention from exactly the kind of people who made their living documenting the personal lives of Seattle's elite. "Have they published anything specific about Sarah?" he asked, using her name for the first time in the conversation. "Not yet," Rebecca replied, "but I suspect they're working on a follow-up story. Seattle Society magazine tends to be thorough when they sense a potential scandal." Michael rubbed his temples, feeling the beginning of a headache that had nothing to do with the scotch he had consumed the night before. The last thing he needed was tabloid speculation about his personal life, especially when he was in the middle of preparing for Harrison Technologies' public offering. "What do you recommend?" he asked, falling back into the familiar rhythm of crisis management that had become second nature during his years of building the company. Complete silence. Rebecca replied immediately, "Don't respond to any questions about your personal life. Don't acknowledge the speculation, and definitely don't contact Ms. Collins. Any reaction from you will only fuel additional coverage." Michael nodded, even though Rebecca couldn't see him. It was the same advice his public relations team had given him during previous media controversies, and it had always proven effective. The gossip publications thrived on reaction and drama. Deprived of both, they typically moved on to other targets within a few days. "What about the business interviews?" he asked. "The Chen Industries partnership is legitimate news. I recommend proceeding as planned," Rebecca said. "Focus exclusively on the business aspects of the partnership and deflect any personal questions with standard responses about maintaining your privacy." After ending the call, Michael stood at his bedroom window, looking out over the city that had made him famous and wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. Somewhere out there, Sarah was probably getting those twins ready for school or daycare, completely unaware that their innocent dinner at Chez Laurent had attracted the attention of gossip photographers. He wondered if she had seen the magazine coverage yet, and how she would react to finding herself the subject of speculation about his love life. During their marriage, Sarah had always hated the attention that came with being involved with a high-profile businessman. She had reluctantly attended charity galas and industry events, but she had never seemed comfortable with the scrutiny that accompanied their public appearances. The irony was that there was no scandal to uncover, no secret romance or dramatic reconciliation. They were simply two people who had happened to dine at the same restaurant on the same evening, their paths crossing briefly in a city that was both large enough to avoid each other and small enough to make such encounters inevitable. But Michael knew that facts rarely mattered when gossip publications sensed a good story. The narrative of the billionaire CEO dining at the same restaurant as his ex-wife and her mysterious children was too tempting to ignore, regardless of the mundane reality behind the coincidence. His first meeting of the day was with his legal team to review the Chen Industries contracts, followed by a conference call with his board of directors to brief them on the partnership details. Both sessions went smoothly, with his lawyers identifying only minor issues that would need to be addressed before signing, and his board members expressing unanimous enthusiasm for the Asian expansion opportunity. But throughout the morning, Michael found his attention drifting to thoughts of Sarah and the twins. During a brief break between meetings, he found himself searching online for information about environmental consulting firms in Seattle, wondering if he might be able to determine where Sarah worked without crossing ethical boundaries. Her LinkedIn profile listed her current employer as EcoVision Consulting, a firm that Michael recognized as having an excellent reputation in the sustainability space. Their website featured case studies of successful corporate transformations, helping traditional industries reduce their environmental impact while maintaining profitability. Sarah's bio described her as a leading expert in industrial sustainability strategies with a proven track record of helping Fortune 500 companies achieve ambitious environmental goals. Reading about her professional accomplishments, Michael felt a complex mixture of emotions. Pride that the woman he had once loved was clearly thriving in her chosen field. Regret that he had somehow lost touch with the environmental mission that had originally inspired his own company, and something that might have been longing for the kind of purposeful work that seemed to drive Sarah's career. When had Harrison Technologies last taken on a project purely because of its environmental benefits, regardless of its profit potential? When had he last made a business decision based primarily on its impact on climate change or sustainability goals? The questions were uncomfortable, particularly in light of his conversation with the Chen Industries team about environmental responsibility. His afternoon was consumed by back-to-back interviews with technology publications, each one focused on the strategic implications of the Chen Industries partnership. Michael found himself in familiar territory, discussing market penetration strategies and competitive advantages with journalists who understood the nuances of the industry. But even as he articulated his vision for expanding into Asian markets, part of his mind remained focused on the broader questions that Seeing Sarah had raised. Was he building something that would genuinely matter in the long term, or was he simply pursuing growth for its own sake? Had success become an end in itself, rather than a means to accomplish something meaningful? The final interview of the day was with Elena Rodriguez from Bloomberg Businessweek, a respected journalist who had covered the technology industry for over a decade. Elena was known for asking probing questions that went beyond surface-level business strategy, and Michael had always appreciated her ability to identify the underlying trends that drove major industry developments. The Chen Industries partnership represents a significant expansion for Harrison Technologies, Elena began, her voice coming through clearly on the video conference call. But I'm curious about the sustainability angle. Your company was originally founded on environmental principles, yet recent product launches seem to have moved away from that focus. How does this partnership relate to your original mission? The question hit Michael like a physical blow, partly because it was so similar to the thoughts that had been occupying his mind since the previous evening. Elena had identified exactly the disconnect that he had been trying to avoid confronting, the gap between Harrison Technologies' original environmental mission and its current profit-focused trajectory. Sustainability remains core to everything we do, Michael replied, falling back on corporate speaking points that felt hollow in his mouth. The Chen Industries partnership will help us bring environmentally responsible technology solutions to markets that desperately need them. Eleanor nodded, but her expression suggested that she wasn't entirely satisfied with his response. Your ex-wife, Sarah Collins, has built quite a reputation in the environmental consulting space, she said, her tone carefully neutral. I wonder if her work has influenced your thinking about corporate responsibility and sustainability initiatives. Michael felt his chest tighten. Elena was one of the most skilled interviewers in the business, and she had a talent for asking questions that revealed more than their subjects intended to share. The fact that she had brought up Sarah suggested that she had done her homework and was aware of their shared history in the environmental space. I have tremendous respect for anyone working to address climate change, Michael replied carefully. But Harrison Technologies' strategic decisions are based on market analysis and our customers' needs, not on any individual's influence. It was a perfectly reasonable response, the kind of deflection that would satisfy most journalists and protect his privacy. But even as he spoke the words, Michael was aware that they represented a retreat from the passionate commitment to environmental responsibility that had once defined both his personal and professional life. After the interview ended, Michael sat in his office, staring out at the Seattle skyline and thinking about the disconnect between his public statements and his private thoughts. When had he become the kind of person who gave carefully crafted non-answers about issues that had once been central to his identity? During the early days of Harrison Technologies, he and Sarah had spent countless hours discussing the potential for technology to address environmental challenges. They had dreamed of building a company that would prove that profitability and environmental responsibility were not just compatible, but mutually reinforcing. Sarah's expertise in environmental science had informed every early product decision, her insights helping him understand the real-world impact of the solutions they were developing. But as the company had grown and the demands of managing rapid expansion had consumed more of his attention, those conversations had become less frequent and eventually had stopped altogether. Somewhere along the way, environmental impact had become just one factor among many in business decisions, rather than the primary consideration that had once guided every choice. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Media attention continues to build around last night's dinner. Seattle Society magazine has published a follow-up piece with additional speculation. Recommend maintaining radio silence. Michael opened his laptop and navigated to the magazine's website, where he found exactly the kind of coverage he had been dreading. The follow-up article was titled, "Billionaire's Mystery Dinner. Tech Mogul Michael Harrison spotted at romantic restaurant with ex-wife and her children." The piece was filled with the kind of breathless speculation that characterized gossip journalism, complete with analysis of body language from grainy photographs and quotes from unnamed sources close to the situation. Most disturbing was the article's focus on the twins, described as two adorable children who appeared to be approximately 5 years old and noted for their striking resemblance to both parents. The implication was clear, even though it was carefully worded to avoid legal liability. The magazine was suggesting that the children might be Michael's, that there might be some secret family connection that explained their presence at the same restaurant. Michael felt a surge of anger at the invasion of privacy, particularly the speculation about children who had done nothing to warrant such attention. Sarah had always valued her privacy, and he could only imagine how she would react to finding herself and her children the subject of tabloid gossip. But beneath the anger was something else, a curious sense of possibility that he couldn't quite identify. What if the children were his? What if during those final chaotic months of their marriage, when he had been traveling constantly and she had been pulling away emotionally, something had happened that neither of them had fully acknowledged? The timeline was possible, if barely. The twins appeared to be around 5 years old, which would place their conception during the final year of his marriage to Sarah. There had been a period of several months when he had been traveling almost constantly, flying between Silicon Valley investor meetings and European client presentations, often gone for weeks at a time. During those absences, Sarah had grown increasingly distant, their conversations reduced to logistics about schedules and household responsibilities. When he was home, they had been like polite strangers sharing living space, maintaining the forms of marriage, while the substance gradually eroded. But despite the emotional distance, they had still been intimate occasionally during that period. Michael remembered a weekend in their final spring together when they had both made an effort to reconnect, spending 2 days hiking in the Cascade Mountains and talking about everything except the problems in their marriage. It had felt like a glimpse of what they had once shared, a reminder of why they had fallen in love in the first place. Could Sarah have discovered she was pregnant during those final months and chosen not to tell him? The possibility seemed far-fetched, but not impossible. Sarah had always been fiercely independent, and if she had concluded that their marriage was beyond saving, she might have decided to handle an unexpected pregnancy on her own terms. Michael shook his head, trying to dismiss the speculation. He was letting gossip journalism plant seeds of doubt about situations that had perfectly reasonable explanations. Sarah had clearly moved on with her life, found someone who could give her the family and stability that Michael had been too focused on his career to provide. The twins were undoubtedly the children of whatever relationship had followed their divorce. But the questions lingered despite his rational analysis. Had he missed something crucial during those final months of their marriage? Had Sarah tried to to tell him something important that he had been too distracted to hear. The possibility that he might have children he knew nothing about was both terrifying and oddly compelling. His intercom buzzed with a call from his head of security, a former FBI agent named David Chen, who managed all aspects of executive protection and privacy for Harrison Technologies' senior leadership team. "Mr. Harrison," David's voice was professionally calm, but Michael detected an underlying tension. "We've identified several photographers positioned outside your residence and office building. It appears that the media attention around last night's dinner is expanding beyond just Seattle Society magazine." Michael sighed, recognizing the familiar pattern of how minor gossip stories could snowball into major media events if they captured the public imagination. The narrative of the billionaire CEO and his mysterious ex-wife was apparently too compelling for other publications to ignore. "What's your recommendation?" Michael asked, falling into the practiced routine of crisis management. "Complete isolation until the story loses momentum," David replied. "Use the private garage entrance, vary your route to the office, and consider staying at the Bellevue Safe House until the photographers lose interest." The Safe House was a luxury condominium that Harrison Technologies maintained for exactly these kinds of situations. A secure location where executives could avoid media attention during sensitive periods. Michael had used it several times over the years, most recently during a patent dispute that had attracted unwanted attention from business journalists. "What about the weekend?" Michael asked, remembering that he had planned to attend a charity gala on Saturday evening. The event was important for maintaining his profile in Seattle's philanthropic community, but it would certainly attract media attention. "I'd recommend skipping any public events until this blows over," David said. "These kinds of stories typically run their course within a week if the subjects don't provide additional fuel." After ending the call, Michael found himself staring at the framed photograph on his desk, the one showing him and Sarah during happier times. In the picture, they looked like any young couple in love, their faces bright with the kind of optimism that comes from believing you can change the world together. When had that optimism faded? When had their shared dreams given way to parallel ambitions that ultimately led them in different directions? Michael couldn't pinpoint a specific moment when everything had changed, but he could trace the gradual erosion of their connection through a series of small choices and missed opportunities. The missed dinners when important meetings ran late, the cancelled vacations when business crises demanded his attention, the conversations about starting a family that were perpetually postponed for the next milestone, the next achievement, the next level of success that always seemed just within reach. Sarah had been patient for longer than she should have been, supporting his dreams even when those dreams left little room for her own aspirations. But everyone had limits, and eventually her patience had been exhausted by the endless cycle of promises deferred and priorities that never seemed to include her. Michael's laptop chimed with an email notification. The sender was an address he didn't recognize, but the subject line made his heart skip a beat. "Regarding recent media coverage." He opened the message and immediately recognized Sarah's writing style, even though they hadn't corresponded in over a year. "Michael, I hope you're well. I wanted to reach out directly rather than have you hear through other channels that the children and I were approached by a photographer this morning outside their school. I assured them that there's no story worth pursuing, but I thought you should be aware that the situation may be escalating beyond what either of us anticipated. I hope we can both weather this with minimal disruption to our respective lives. Best regards, Sarah." Reading Sarah's message, Michael felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that she had contacted him directly, rather than leaving him to wonder about her reaction to the media coverage. concerned that photographers were now targeting her and the children at their school, and something that might have been longing for the kind of straightforward communication they had once shared. But what struck him most was the tone of the message. Polite, considerate, but utterly devoid of any personal warmth. She might have been writing to a distant acquaintance rather than someone with whom she had once shared the most intimate aspects of her life. The formality of "best regards, Sarah" hit him harder than any anger or recrimination could have. Michael found himself typing and deleting several responses, unable to find the right tone for a situation that had no clear precedent. How do you respond to your ex-wife when tabloid journalists are speculating about secret connections between your lives? How do you express concern for her privacy without appearing to overstep boundaries that had been carefully established during their divorce proceedings? Finally, he settled on a message that he hoped struck the right balance between concern and respect for her independence. Sarah, thank you for letting me know about the photographer. I'm sorry that you and the children are being dragged into this situation. My security team is monitoring the coverage, and they believe it should die down within a few days if we avoid giving them any additional material to work with. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to help protect your privacy during this time, Michael. He read the message 3 times before hitting send, second-guessing every word choice and punctuation mark. The response felt inadequate, too formal for someone who had once known every detail of his hopes and fears, but any attempt at greater intimacy would have been inappropriate given their current circumstances. Sarah's reply came within minutes, its brevity suggesting that she had already moved on to other concerns. Thank you. I'm sure it will pass quickly. Take care. Michael stared at the screen for several minutes after reading her response, struck by how completely their relationship had been reduced to polite exchanges between virtual strangers. There had been a time when they could talk for hours about everything and nothing, when silences between them had been comfortable rather than awkward. Now they communicated like distant business associates, careful to maintain appropriate boundaries and avoid any suggestion of improper intimacy. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of routine meetings and conference calls, but Michael found his concentration fragmented by thoughts of Sarah and the children. Every time his phone buzzed with a notification, he wondered if it might be another message from her. Every time he glanced at the framed photograph on his desk, he found himself wondering about the life she had built after their divorce. By evening, the media coverage had indeed expanded beyond Seattle's local gossip publications. Michael's assistant reported that they had received interview requests from 3 national magazines and 2 television programs, all focused on the mysterious dinner at Chez Laurent and speculation about his relationship with his ex-wife. Following David Chen's security recommendations, Michael used the private garage entrance to leave his office building and took a circuitous route to the Bellevue safe house. The condominium was luxuriously appointed but sterile, the kind of space that was designed for temporary occupation rather than actual living. As he sat in the unfamiliar living room, eating takeout Chinese food and scrolling through the latest media coverage on his laptop, Michael reflected on the strange turn his life had taken in less than 24 hours. Yesterday morning, he had been preparing for a routine business dinner that would advance his company's expansion plans. Tonight, he was hiding from photographers while gossip journalists speculated about his personal life and mysterious children who might or might not be connected to his past. The situation would have been laughable if it weren't so invasive and potentially damaging to both his business reputation and Sarah's privacy. But beneath the frustration and inconvenience, Michael was aware of something else, a sense that the universe was forcing him to confront questions about his life that he had been successfully avoiding for years. What did he actually want from his life beyond continued business success? When was the last time he had made a decision based on personal fulfillment rather than strategic advantage? If he had children he knew nothing about, how would that change his understanding of what mattered most? The questions were uncomfortable, particularly because they didn't have clear answers that could be addressed with the same analytical approach he applied to business challenges. But as he sat alone in the safe house, surrounded by luxury that felt increasingly hollow, Michael began to suspect that avoiding these questions was no longer an option. His phone rang, displaying a number he didn't recognize. Michael hesitated before answering, wondering if it might be a journalist who had somehow obtained his personal contact information. "Michael Harrison speaking," he said cautiously. "Mr. Harrison, this is Dr. Amanda Phillips from Seattle Children's Hospital." The woman's voice was professional, but carried an urgency that immediately captured Michael's attention. "I'm calling because we have a situation involving Sarah Collins and her children." Michael's blood turned to ice. "What kind of situation? Are they hurt?" "One of the children, Emma, was brought in with severe allergic reaction symptoms. Sarah listed you as an emergency contact on the hospital forms. She's requesting your presence immediately." Michael was already moving toward the door. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. The drive to Seattle Children's Hospital felt endless, despite Thomas breaking several speed limits. Michael's mind raced with possibilities, each worse than the last. Why would Sarah list him as an emergency contact? They hadn't spoken regularly in 2 years, had no legal obligations to each other, unless... The pediatric emergency room buzzed with controlled chaos. Michael spotted Sarah immediately, pacing near the nurse's station, her face pale with worry. She looked up as he approached, relief flooding her features. "Thank God you came," she whispered. "Emma's stable now, but it was terrifying. She had an allergic reaction to something at school." "Where's her father?" Michael asked, the question slipping out before he could stop himself. Sarah's expression shifted, vulnerability replacing relief. "There isn't one. Not in the way you mean." She took a shaky breath. "Michael, we need to talk." A doctor emerged from one of the treatment rooms, her scrubs bearing small cartoon characters. "Ms. Collins, Emma's responding well to treatment. She's asking for her mom and..." She glanced at Michael with curiosity. "For Daddy Michael." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. Sarah's face crumpled slightly as she watched his reaction. "I was going to tell you," she said quietly, "right before the divorce was finalized. But you were in Singapore for 3 weeks, then London. When you came back, the papers were already signed. You seemed so relieved to be free." Michael stared at her, his world reshaping itself around this revelation. "They're mine." "Twins run in my family," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "Emma and Jake. They're 5. 5 years." Michael's voice was hollow. "I have children who are 5 years old." A small voice called from the treatment room. "Mommy, is Daddy Michael here? You said he might come." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "They've seen your picture in magazines. I told them you were too busy to visit, but that maybe someday..." She wiped her eyes. "They think you're some kind of superhero businessman who saves companies." Michael felt the foundations of his carefully constructed life crumbling. Every missed dinner, every cancelled vacation, every choice he'd made in favor of business over family suddenly took on new meaning. He hadn't just lost his marriage. He'd lost 5 years with children he never knew existed. "Can I see them?" he asked. Sarah nodded, leading him toward the treatment room. Inside, a little girl with Sarah's auburn hair and Michael's green eyes lay on the hospital bed, an IV in her small arm. A boy who looked exactly like her sat in a chair beside the bed, clutching a stuffed dinosaur. "Emma, Jake," Sarah said softly. "This is Michael, the one I told you about." Emma's face lit up despite her obvious fatigue. "Are you really my daddy? The one who builds computer things?" Michael knelt beside the bed, his throat tight with emotion. "Yeah, sweetheart, I am." Jake studied him seriously. "Mommy says you're very important and help lots of people, but you're too busy to live with us." The innocent words cut deeper than any accusation could have. Michael looked at his son, and saw a lifetime of bedtime stories and soccer games and school plays that he'd missed. "I was busy," Michael said quietly, "but I didn't know about you, if I had known." "Would you have come to my birthday party?" Emma asked. "I had a unicorn cake." "I would have been there for every birthday," Michael promised, his voice breaking. Sarah touched his shoulder. "The doctor says Emma can go home tonight. They both missed you at dinner last night at the restaurant. They kept asking about the man at the other table who looked sad." Michael turned to her, seeing clearly. "For the first time in years, I was sad. I've been sad for a long time without realizing it." Over the next hour, as Emma was cleared for discharge, Michael learned about his children's lives in fragments. Jake loved dinosaurs and wanted to be a paleontologist. Emma was fascinated by horses and had already declared her intention to become a veterinarian. They both excelled at school, were kind to other children, and had been asking about their father for months. "I put your name on their birth certificates," Sarah admitted as they prepared to leave the hospital. "I know we were divorced, but I couldn't lie about that. I hoped someday." "Why didn't you tell me?" Michael asked as they walked to the parking garage. "Because I knew you'd do exactly what you're probably thinking of doing now," Sarah replied. "Drop everything, upend your life, try to fix it all at once. These are children, Michael, not a business problem to be solved." Michael stopped walking. "What if I want to upend my life? What if I'm tired of building empires for their own sake? What if I want to build something that actually matters?" Sarah studied his face in the fluorescent light of the parking garage. "Then you start slowly. You get to know them. You show up consistently. You become part of their lives instead of trying to reorganize their lives around you." "I want that," Michael said. "I want to be their father, really be their father." "Then prove it," Sarah challenged. "Not with grand gestures or expensive gifts. Show up for dinner on Sunday. Come to Jake's dinosaur presentation at school next week. Be present." As they reached Sarah's modest sedan, the twins already buckled into their car seats, Michael felt something shift inside him. The Chen Industries partnership, the IPO preparations, the magazine interviews, all of it seemed suddenly less important than the two small faces looking at him through the car window. "Sunday dinner?" he asked. 6 o'clock, Sarah confirmed. "But Michael, they've built a life that works. I won't let you disrupt their stability for your own guilt or need to make up for lost time." "I understand." Michael knelt by the car window. "Emma, Jake, I'll see you Sunday, okay? Maybe we can talk about dinosaurs and horses." Both children nodded enthusiastically, and as Sarah drove away, Michael stood alone in the parking garage, his entire world transformed. Monday morning, instead of reviewing IPO documents, Michael called an emergency board meeting. He announced his intention to step back from day-to-day operations, to refocus Harrison Technologies on genuine environmental impact rather than pure growth. He would remain CEO, but delegate more responsibilities to his capable team. "I have other priorities now," he explained to his surprised board members. "Personal ones that I should have attended to years ago." That Sunday, Michael Harrison, billionaire, tech mogul, former workaholic, sat at Sarah's kitchen table, helping Jake build a dinosaur diorama while Emma drew pictures of horses. It was the most important meeting of his life, and for once nothing else seemed to matter. The gossip magazines eventually found other stories to pursue. The Chen Industries partnership proceeded successfully. Harrison Technologies' stock soared when they announced their renewed commitment to environmental innovation. But none of that mattered as much as the moment 3 months later when Emma ran toward him at her school pickup calling, "Daddy!" Then Jake shyly asked if he wanted to see his latest fossil discovery. Michael had spent years building an empire. Now he was learning to build something far more precious, a family, one Sunday dinner at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more. Standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.